Hello, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio. Passionate World Talk Radio is a subsidiary of Global Media Network LLC, and our mantra is educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guest may not represent those of the host of the station. Folks, I have always phenomenal guests on my show. I have to say so myself, and I do. I have, I'll toot my own horn, no one else is going to. And as you know, I love to have fun on my show, and what you hear is me being me, because that's the only person I can be. And with me today is a fellow Jersey girl. Yay! So we're going to have lots of fun. Alexandra Free is my guest today, and she wrote a book. Folks, listen to the name of the title of this book, From 0 to 10, a guide to help you thrive as a caregiver. And then it says, I love this, from someone who's been there. That's what I love. I love when someone writes a book who's been there. And Alexandra likes to be called the Lex. So Lex is an author, a writer, caregiver advocate, former caregiver to her parents. Her dad had cancer. Her mom had Alzheimer's. And Lex spent 20 years as a talent executive and stage manager in the demanding field of live television. I want to welcome you, Lex, to Chatting with Betsy.
Thanks, Betsy. I'm glad to be here. The fellow New Jersey in
yes.
Right? Jersey in. Hello.
Yes. 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 You know, it's so funny that the world is small, right?
Yeah.
Because when I saw your press release, I said, oh, I've got to interview this person. And I never know, you know, when I send an email, if I'm going to get a response back. And I'm so happy that you responded back, and we had talked prior to scheduling you. And I just loved your passion and talking to you then. It was back in August, which time goes by so fast.
God,
and,
I know, remember?
Yeah, it seemed like yesterday. And I have to ask you, what I ask all the writers, what motivated you to write this phenomenal book?
Oh, well, thank you for calling it phenomenal, for starters.
You're welcome.
Honestly, it really was it was a combo platter. It was a labor of love, and it was also a situation where I coach people. I help people, caregivers who are going through what I went through and what you went through. It was also, though, like a situation where I was getting a little tired of constantly repeating myself. And I was like, you know what? Why don't I just take all of this and put it in a book? And it really is shocking how, you know, you can love somebody, you can know somebody your whole entire life, but it's shocking how little you actually know about somebody when, you know, push comes to shove. And I realized as I was starting to care for my parents, first of all, nobody in my family was ever sick until my parents, or at least nobody that I was in direct contact with. Like my grandmother passed away at 93 in her sleep. You know, her father died at 100. You know, so in my family, longevity was sort of the thing. And when you were done, you just sort of died. And, you know, nobody was really dealing with 10 years of caring for someone. So when my parents got ill, I mean, my dad was pretty unexpected, but my mother, it was Alzheimer's, and as you know, that's a long process. But, you know, it's, first of all, it's shocking to me how much, again, like I said, you don't know about your parents or your loved ones, like, you know, what they're doing online, who they're interacting with, you know, what they're subscribing to, what kind of medications they take, all these things that, you know, you're constantly worrying about when you are their caregiver. But up until that moment, I didn't know half of those things about my parents. But also, it's a case of it's hard to know what you need to do when someone gets sick if you're not prepared beforehand. And in my case, because nobody in my family ever had these long, drawn-out illnesses before, I didn't know, what legal documents I needed or, anything, about long-term care until I was actually smack dab up against it. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, my God, I don't know anything. And that's sort of what, this book is all about. It's the journey I went through. I mean, it really is a guide, and it's meant to, this is what you should do first, this is what you should do second, this is what you should do third. But it's also intertwined with my personal experience because when my dad got sick, I wasn't prepared at all. I had no idea. I was working in Los Angeles in television, got a phone call at 4 o'clock in the morning saying your dad's in the hospital in New Jersey. I'm in L.A. And my father, it took him about 7 months. He never got out of the hospital. He slowly expired over 7 months. And those 7 months were really like a PhD in caregiving as far as, legal documents and medical information and long-term care and Medicaid and wills and trusts and all that stuff. I learned everything on the go. So that when my mother got sick, I was completely prepared. And I found, even though Alzheimer's is truly brutal disease, and nothing can quite prepare you for that, I was at least in the other sense, I was prepared. The moment I realized there was something wrong, potentially wrong with my mother, even before we knew it was Alzheimer's, I was taking her to lawyers. I was getting her I got power of attorney. I got all of her legal documents set up. It was a vastly different experience going from having no knowledge with my father to knowing exactly what I needed to do with my mother. And it, again, even though it was heartbreaking and awful in its own way, it was a lot easier knowing what I needed to do, what legal documents I needed to have, who to talk to, what doctors, and that's sort of what, I can't make caregiving better for anybody. I can't take away the heartbreak or the exhaustion or the millions of other emotions that come along with it. But I feel like if I can help you be prepared, have the legal documents that you need, which are, if you don't have them, you're in a world of pain. At least I can do my part to help people. And by sharing the information, I feel like, I'm helping in some way. I mean, I wish I could go and give everybody a hug and be like, oh, it's going to be okay, and let me rub your feet or something, but that's not possible. Yeah. So this is as close as I can get to that.
Wow, Lex, I wish I could hug you because what you said, you're a girl after my own heart because knowledge, I always say knowledge is power, and one of the reasons why I do this show is to help people, and I've been banging the drum of, getting prepared, power of attorney, medical, financial, the wills, so important that sometimes I probably sound redundant, but I don't care because it needs to be said over and over again. And you're exactly right. We don't know until it happens to us, and then we're floundering, and there's no one to guide us. Now, I feel that caregivers now in 2023, soon to be 2024, caregivers now have such an advantage over what you and I had because there's information out there. There are podcasts, there are webinars, there are seminars, so many people, so many resources that there's no, I say it because, I'm a Jersey girl, there's no excuse, folks, not to be educated now. And I say this all the time, Lex, that, Alzheimer's in the U.S. is the number 6 killer. Educate yourself now. Get prepared now. It doesn't matter if Alzheimer's is in your family or not. Somebody is likely to have Alzheimer's or some other kind of dementia. Excuse me. And I feel that caregivers need guidance. When my mother-in-law was diagnosed in 2000, I never even heard of Alzheimer's, and I worked as a nurse. And you're left, what do I do?
Right.
And with Matt, in education, you put out a very good point. The knowledge that you had from your dad helped you with your mom. I had the knowledge that I gained from my mother-in-law, talking about a PhD with Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And then there wasn't the information back then with Matt. It's such a difference. And I tell people all the time,
yeah,
education makes your journey easier in a lot of ways, and it's better for your loved one.
Yeah.
And you're a testament to that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I said, there's nothing's going to make it not awful. Alzheimer's, I think, is probably one of the most particularly cruel diseases out there. But regardless of whether it's Alzheimer's, cancer, or just old age, being a caregiver, they should be giving out medals for this and having television shows and award shows for it because, it truly is one of the most difficult things to go through. But, we can't necessarily change that. We can't make it easier for people emotionally. But like you said, knowledge is power. And I can 100% attest to, and I'm sure you can too, that when you have your ducks in a row, and that's what I'm always screaming, like, get your ducks in a row.
Yes.
It does make it easier. It doesn't take away the pain. It doesn't take away the exhaustion. It doesn't take away those days where you're just like, I want to crawl in a hole and never come out. Like, those days are going to be there. But they're so much less stressful because even though you're going to go through those emotions anyway, when you're not prepared or you don't have the right legal documentation, therefore a doctor can't talk to you or a bank can't talk to you, you think you were stressed out before, wait until, you don't have the right legal documentation and people are like, sorry, can't help you. And,
yes.
Yeah, and institutions are more worried, I believe, unfortunately, not all of them, but, they don't want to get sued. So even though they may want to help you, they can't. Their hands are legally tied. Like, they can't share information with you, even though you might have it tattooed on your forehead. Like, this is my mother. I am her child. I'm an only child, and my mother wasn't married. So I was it. I was the only advocate for my mother. And again, with my mother, I had all the information I needed. But, same thing with my dad. Like, with my dad, they couldn't get, there was nothing anybody could do because I didn't have the right legal information. Now, interestingly enough, I had my uncle, one of his best friends, an old family friend, was a lawyer who really helped me out. And as unfortunate as the whole situation with my father was, I was very lucky in the sense that I had people helping me, and I had people helping me for free. Like, I wasn't paying $1,000 an hour for the legal information I was having. And because my father, even though he had health insurance, because he never left the hospital, after 20 days, his insurance stopped paying 100%, and after 100 days, his insurance stopped paying. You have to leave the hospital for 20 days and then come back. I believe it's 20 days. So his insurance basically ran out, and he owed millions and millions and millions of dollars. I think at one point it was like $5 or $6 million. Because of that, the hospital started working with me because they wanted money. So even though I didn't have the right legal documentation, they were like, okay, let's see what we can do. And we started the whole Medicaid process with my father. But again, because I didn't have the right legal papers, by no fault of my own or my father's, I was going to have to go to court. And the Medicaid people at the hospital, the counselors were lovely, and, I was speaking to lawyers and judges. But I was going to have to go to court and basically declare my father legally insane or incapable of caring for himself so that I could get custody of my father in order to then bypass the fact that I didn't have the legal documentation I needed, mainly the power of attorney, because my father had like an IRA. So because of that IRA, the hospital Medicaid couldn't click in. Like I had to have legal power of attorney, to take his IRA account and give it to the state so that he could then get on Medicaid, and Medicaid would pay all of his medical bills. So you think you're stressed out and depressed because your father's dying and all these things are going on, and constantly people are saying, you should pull the plug, and then add to that you got to go to court and sue your father, or basically say that your father is legally insane so you can get control over him. It was one of the darkest moments of my life. My father actually passed away 2 days before my court date, so I never actually had to do that. But there was a part of me that was like, this is the most heart-wrenching thing to do the whole process, and the whole process was heart-wrenching. But I was like, to get my father legally declared insane, that didn't happen. But again, because of all of that, I knew exactly what I was going to do with my mother. Like I had a plan, and it made it so much more simple. And my book actually, like I said, it is a guide. I mean, it doesn't read necessarily like a guide, but at the end of every chapter there's a checklist. And at the end of the book there's a master checklist of literally everything you should know, like even down to the blood type. Do you know where the divorce papers are, or the marriage license? Because that is something that if you're trying to get your loved one on Medicaid, they're going to want the documentation. Why, I'm not entirely sure. My parents have been divorced for 30 years. Yeah, my parents had been divorced for 30 years when my father passed away. And yet they still wanted my parents' marriage license when I was getting my mom on Medicaid. I was like, okay, the guy's dead. They had been divorced. I have the divorce papers, but they were like, nope, we want the marriage license. I was like, oh, God. But so this book has, and my website, you could go to my website and get a master checklist, just download it if you don't want to buy the book, although I do recommend the book just because it explains why you need all the information and the difference between all the different legal documents. But, I have people who are buying the book who are contacting me who don't even have anybody in the family who's sick, but they're using it as a way to get their ducks in a row. Because God forbid.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
These are things, because accidents are called accidents for a reason. You're not prepared for them, So it's better to be ahead of the game than, behind the eight ball, I think.
Oh, that's very, very true. I agree 100%. I feel, and I even heard someone on a business station say that she agreed with me. She didn't know she was agreeing with me because I'm talking to her. She can't hear me, of course, but I'm agreeing with her as I listen to the radio. And she said, and I said the same thing, everyone at the age of 18, like when your child goes off to college or lives on their own, as a parent, you have no legal course at that point. Every child should have a living will, give someone power of attorney, financial and medical, and it can always be changed. Wills can always be updated. But had that in place. I did it for my own son. I went and got power of attorney for him. It was during, I wanted to do it, and then COVID happened. And I said, after, this goes away and we could get to see a lawyer, I got to get this because I need to have power of attorney. And I can definitely, and then I know because with Matt, as soon as he was diagnosed, I went to a lawyer and had power of attorney, financial, had the house changed to my name, took his name off of everything.
That was smart,
and I told Matt, because a lot of people, especially older generation, like my mom's generation, they think, oh, I'm taking power away from somebody. You're not. You're not taking anything away from them. It's there for when you need it. And I told Matt, you are still going to make your medical decisions as long as you can, because it's your health, as long as you can make those decisions. But I wanted his wishes known, and a lot of people, a lot of people, still want to have these conversations, and it's necessary to have it. And
people are like, oh, it's so depressing. I'm like, you think it's depressing now? Wait until something happens and you don't know what their wishes are. Like, I accidentally I knew my father didn't want to be on life support, but he had told me that my whole life. It was the most bizarre thing. And we'd be like in the middle of a conversation and he would be like, don't ever put me on life support. I'm like, where did that just come from? But I was glad because at least I knew that much. But because he didn't have a living will or a health care proxy, if he had had the right legal documentation, they never, ever, ever would have done what they did because I gave them permission. And basically what happened was my dad was going into congestive heart failure. And the doctors believed he was in a coma. They believed it was because his heart was, he hadn't eaten anything in like a month. And they said if we put in a feeding tube and we flush his body out with proteins, get all the toxins out. He was in a coma. He was unconscious, but he wasn't technically in a coma. His brain was working. They couldn't figure out what was going on, and they believed that it was because his kidneys were going into failure from all the toxins in his body, and that if they put in a feeding tube and they flushed out all the toxins with proteins, he would wake up. And then they said, I was like, is this life support? And they're like, no, this is not life support. This is therapy. And I was like, you sure? And they're like, absolutely. This, if this was my father, this is what I would do. And I was like, okay. And they're like, but while we're at it, we'd like to put in a trach. We'd like to give him a trach so that he can get off they were having feeding tube or breathing tubes down his throat, and it was irritating his throat. So they're like, if we can get more oxygen into his body, that will also help with the detox process, and it'll help him heal quicker. And I was like, do you consider this, life support? And they're like, no, this is also therapy. But it was an operation. They put in the trach, they put in the feeding tube, and he didn't wake up. So eventually he did, but not immediately. And by the time he had woken up, that he was on life support. And I did it out of love, but by complete accident. And had I not done that, if he had had the right legal documents, they would have just made him comfortable, and he would have passed away. And it would have been the 6 months of hell that he went through afterwards. Never would have happened. And I beat myself up over that a lot. Sometimes, it just hits me and I just start crying. But again, you think it's depressing to have this conversation when everybody's healthy and stuff? It's 10 times worse when you accidentally put someone you love on life support and it's your fault, So you got to take everything with a grain of salt. And I say just get it out of the way. Do it. Nobody likes to have these conversations. But once it's done, it's done. And then you can spend the rest of your life enjoying that person's life versus worrying about finding that time. When's the best time to do it? There's never a good time to talk about what do you want to do? How do you want to die? That's never a fun conversation. Right. But if you get it out of the way first, it's like eating your vegetables first. Just get them out of the way. And then you can eat all the good stuff.
Absolutely. Yes. I remember asking my mom years ago, where would you like to be? What are your wishes when you can no longer care for yourself? She got mad at me. She was very adamant. I'm staying in my house. Well, as it turns out, she's now in an assisted living facility because my brother died, who lived with my mom, and she was alone, and to the point where she couldn't be alone anymore. So my younger brother said, "Ma, you have to go to a assisted living. It's not safe."
Right.
And it's very, very true. I know that even planning, pre-planning a funeral is very important. I know people don't like to talk about that either, Lex, but, when you go on Medicaid, they want you to do that. If you go in the facility, especially like a nursing home facility, they want you to do that. I know my mom had to do that. when my dad went on Medicaid. She had to do that.
Yeah, because they want you to prepay for, you're allowed to prepay for certain things with Medicaid. Yeah. No, it's funny because it's not funny, but after my mother passed away, my sister-in-law, my mother-in-law, and I went out to, it wasn't immediately after, it was maybe the year later or whatever, but we were at one of these places that we go to every year, around in the fall. It's a beautiful place to go, leaf peeping or whatever they call it, and we have brunch. We were sitting there having a lovely conversation, and all of a sudden my mother-in-law, who is still alive, she's 93 years old, she must have been 90 at the time, she's like, I want to talk about my funeral. And my sister-in-law was like, yeah. And I was like, all right, let's talk about it. And it was, she was having a Bloody Mary. She's like, I want this song, and I want these flowers, and we made it fun. Like, she was actually, it sounds kind of morbid, but it wasn't. She was talking about everything, and she's like, I have been walking around holding this in for so long, and I never knew when to have this conversation. She's like, I feel so much better now. And last summer, not 2003, but in 2022, my mother-in-law got diagnosed with colon cancer. And she's fine. And, the woman is amazing. She had part of her colon removed and never had any painkillers or anything. Like, the doctors are like, I have never seen anything like this before. And she is the unthinkable Molly Brown. Like, she is a hardcore, awesome woman. And, but she said, when everybody was like, well, what do we do if something happens? She's like, Lex has all the information. And they were like, you do? And I was like, yeah, we just kind of had a party one day, and she told me about all the songs she wants and where she wants her ashes scattered, and they were like, wow, okay. But it was just it was a lovely day that we had. I know it sounds kind of weird, but I know you would understand that. But it wasn't sad. We were sort of celebrating, and I was like, okay, do you want, who do you want to give a toast? And she was like, blah, 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 and I want everybody to drink this, and whatever. But when the time came and she was about to go under, she wasn't stressed out either, except for she did say, you know what, I've changed my mind about one of the songs. So I was like, okay. But, it doesn't have to be, it's not a pleasant conversation, but it doesn't have to be depressing. She wasn't saying, I'm going to die tomorrow, this is what I want. She's like, when the time comes, and, she was worried about how to have this conversation, and, she had been walking around hoping that at some point she could have this conversation with somebody, and when it happened, it was great. It was a nice little, like I said, we were having, Bloody Marys and just having a good time, looking at the leaves. It wasn't sad, and it doesn't have to be sad. It's unfortunately it's a part of life, but if you do it right, it could actually be beautiful in a way,
Exactly. That's very true. I tell my son now what I want, and I've made my wishes known. I think this society that we're in, Lex, kind of shies away from talking about death and dying, and it needs to be discussed because it is part of, it's a circle of life. And, it's just like grieving. And my goodness, that could be a whole nother show.
Oh my God. We could talk for days about grieving.
On grieving. And, I think it's great when we could have these open conversations. And, it's not a matter of if someone's going to die. It's really when, and you just never know. And it's so important. I know with Matt, I had thought I sent his power of attorney over to the life insurance, but they didn't receive it because they weren't going to tell me anything. And I said, okay, I'll resend it again. So I sent it certified mail or registered, so made sure that they, received it. But, Medicare, your life insurance, pension plans, you can't do anything unless you have the power of attorney.
No,
and
you can't.
I know that for a fact because I experienced that even with doctors, which is, very true. hospitals to get that information. And I think it's important really for our wishes to be known, and for a person, a relative or a friend, whoever you want, to be able to respect your wishes. They don't have to agree with them,
right.
But to honor them. You know, if someone doesn't want life support and you know that, and it's written down. If someone wants to be cremated, but maybe you don't agree with that, well, that's their wish.
Right.
And that's, I think, important. And Lex, I know that you said that you felt guilty, you know, with your dad, and I could just say this: no, guilt is an energy drainer, and we don't know what we don't know, and you have to give yourself the love and grace, and just let it go, because it will weigh you down.
Well, it's funny. Oh, sorry, go on.
Excuse me. I had that with Matt. I felt guilty for picking out the wrong hospice, and it was really weighing me down until I let it go. Now, go ahead.
You know, you do. You have to let it go. What's interesting is, in my situation, because I didn't have the right legal documents, I had an aunt and an uncle who, even though the hospital saw me as his next of kin, because he wasn't married, I'm his only child, so technically I was, you know, in charge of making decisions. But I had my uncle and my aunt who were chiming in and had their own opinions. And it was shocking to me, because there were times where my father, once he was on life support, where he was unconscious. And again, the hospital my dad was like this weird situation where the doctors were perplexed. Nobody knew really what was going on with him. And like one day he'd be, you know, in the midst of kidney failure, and they would call me from California and I'd fly home. I was coming home every week to every other week. I was still living in Los Angeles when my father was in the hospital. And I would fly home because they were like, okay, that's it. He's got 24 hours. And I'd get home, and all of a sudden he'd be like conscious and awake, and everything was fine. And they never knew what was going on with him. But there were periods also where he was unconscious. And, you know, the doctors would be like, listen, he's never going to eat, speak, talk, walk, sit up. You know, is this really a life you want to, maintain? Like this is, and to me, knowing that my father never wanted to be on life support, there were moments where it was sort of a no-brainer. Like, he's unconscious. He's one staph infection away from death. His kidneys are failing, and yet my aunt and my uncle were fighting me, because in their mind, alive was alive. It wasn't quality of life. It was that he was still alive. And it was shocking to me that people who I'm related to thought that way. But I like you're saying, you know, people don't necessarily all feel the same way. I mean, like, I'm very spiritual, but I wouldn't say I'm, you know, religious, like, you know, Christian or Catholic or Jewish or whatever. Like, I don't follow just one sort of whatever. And in my family's eyes, you know, they're Catholic. You don't pull a plug. You know, God takes them when they're ready. And it was shocking to me. And there were battles, and people sued me to take control over my father. I wasn't going to pull the plug. I wanted to have a consensus, because pulling the plug is, you know, that's something nobody wants to do. But yeah, like, again, having the right legal documents. If my father had said, I never want to be on life support, I don't want to, be intubated, there is a legal document where you can say, I don't want to be intubated. And, it never would have been up to me, and it wouldn't have been up to my family. And you just don't want to do that to anybody you love. I would think. I would never want to put my husband, I don't have children. It's just my husband and I and my cousins, and, you know, I have extended family who I'm very close to. I wouldn't want to have any of them have to go through what I went through, like accidentally putting me on life support, or then having to struggle with the idea of, do I pull the plug, or having family members suing them. You know, by having the right legal documents, you're not only getting your wishes fulfilled, but you're you're preventing people that you love or protecting people that you love from having to make really horrible, hard decisions that could haunt them for the rest of their lives, you know? But what I was going to say, what's funny but not funny is I actually wrote a book about the whole experience with my father. I also wrote a book about the whole experience with my mother, and it's kind of juxtaposed between, you know, here I am working on the Grammys, hanging out with Sting, doing all these, you know, seemingly glamorous things, having worked in television for 20-some-odd years. I'm a talent executive. I work with celebrities on award shows, basically, and TV specials. And, you know, so here I have this really glamorous life, and then I'm flying home and dealing with, like, you know, wiping my father's mouth because, you know, he's drooling all over the place and dealing with, like, you know, life and death things. And it was just this weird stage in my life where on one hand I'm, like, living a dream, and on the other hand I'm, like, stuck in this nightmare. And during the pandemic, I just started writing, and I wrote a memoir. It's being shopped around right now. It's not out. But it was interesting writing my father's story, or our story, mine and my father's story, and reliving everything. I mean, there were moments where I would collapse on the kitchen floor and just start, like, bawling. Like, I was inconsolable while I was writing this because I was going through it again. But what was interesting is at the end, I realized I would have done everything the exact same way. If I could have, I would go back and get all the right legal documentation so I wouldn't have had to go through it at all. But minus the paperwork, like, I realize now that the decisions I made, and this is what you were kind of saying, I would make them again because at the time, you know, if the doctors were like, listen, if you don't do this right now, if you don't put the feeding tube in right now, your father's going to die. And it's like watching somebody you love drown. Like, what do? Are you going to toss them a life preserver and hope that they survive? Of course you are. You know, unless, of course, there's a legal document saying, don't toss me a life preserver. You know, I mean, you're going to try to save somebody if it's in your power. And so, yeah, like, you know, I did beat myself up for a decade, 15 years. I don't even know how long it was. But after I wrote the book, I realized I was like, you know what? I did the best I could with what I had at the time. And given the exact same situation, knowing what I know now, I still would have done it because, you know, there was a chance I was going to save my father. It didn't work out that way, but, you know, and you're right. Like, you can't beat yourself up. You can't feel guilty about stuff. It's very common when you're a caregiver, you know, to feel guilty because you feel like you're either not doing enough or you did it wrong or you're angry at them, and then you feel guilty about being angry at them because they obviously don't want to be sick, you know. But there are times where you're like, you know, screaming into your pillow like, oh. But
yes,
you know.
caregiver guilt. Yes, it's a phenomenon.
True,
I mean, it is real, and you know, a lot of people don't talk about caregiver post-traumatic stress afterwards, and that's real. Thankfully, it's being recognized. Yes, it's finally being recognized. Hallelujah. I've always been ahead of my time, Lex. I saw there's no such thing like 18 years ago, and now it's being recognized, and it should be. And I had to say that when people, you know, make their wishes known, and it's a gift. You're giving a gift to your family because then they don't have to fight about it and you'll be stressed out about it. And I think it's great now that there's several hospice nurses on social media talking about death and dying. And I don't mean to be morbid, folks, but this is reality. How I wish they were on 5 years ago. And that would have saved me some guilt to know the dying process. And even though I worked as a nurse, I wasn't taught the dying process. And, you know, I was thinking Matt was having these high fevers, and I felt guilty because he wasn't having IVs. But then I found out that as part of the dying process, having the high fevers and giving them fluids when their body is shutting down, more harm. I wish I knew this information. This is why, folks, I'm telling you to say this every week, educate yourselves, really, about death and dying. And it's not being morbid. It's so that you know what to expect. And it really is beneficial to know what to expect. And, I mean, everyone is different. Like your mom had Alzheimer's, and everyone is different. But just to have general knowledge, like what do you do when they start hallucinating? A lot of people argue with their loved one. Don't argue.
Yeah. I know.
Go with it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, I think there's a stage with everybody with Alzheimer's, the caregiver for somebody with Alzheimer's. I think at the beginning there's a part of you that feels like, if you correct them, that maybe they'll snap back. Like they'll remember and they'll be like, oh, yeah, like, so I think initially in the no matter how many times somebody says, no, don't correct them, there's still a part of you that's like, no, Mom, remember, like, this is how it happened. And then you think like, oh, suddenly it's going to be like, a Disney movie where, oh, they just come back because you corrected them and that one piece of information was the missing puzzle piece to get them back. But you do begin to realize, like, you know what, it's fine. Let them think. I mean, unless, of course, it's a scary hallucination or something is awful, then you want to try to, talk them off the ledge and let them know that everything's okay and,
right,
there is no
reassure
monsters
them,
or whatever. Right, yeah.
Right.
But, yeah, it's like you were saying, and I think it is important, I mean, so much of our lives are, especially if you're into self-help and all this other stuff, it's all about how to live a better life or how to live longer or how to do this or how to do that. But it's all about life and living, and as it should be. I mean, you don't want to spend your whole life thinking about death, but, we don't know much about death. We don't educate ourselves about it because it's depressing. And, there are cultures where death is very much a part of the whole process. But in America, it is sort of taboo. You don't want to talk about it. I think we think that if we talk about it, we're going to bring it on. Like if we just had those manifestation powers, If I was that powerful, that would be great. I'd be winning the lottery every single day. But,
yeah,
but
that's
it is
true.
Important. Yeah, it's important. And it's the same thing about Alzheimer's. It's weird. I mean, I remember growing up in cancer and heart disease were the big, things that most people passed away from. But boomers, there's like 70 million people in the 59 to 77, the baby boomer age. And I hate to say it, but Alzheimer's is going to become like a pandemic, or it already kind of is. But people don't want to talk about it because with cancer and heart disease, I believe, this is my take on it, this isn't statistics or anything, but I mean, there's still hope. You could go into remission. I know plenty of people who've had cancer for 40 years. I mean, they've just kept it under control. Same with heart disease. If you eat right and exercise, chances are you can beat this or at least, maintain it for a really long time. Alzheimer's is different. Currently, there's no cure, and it's scary as hell. And I get that. But not educating yourself on it because it scares you is really doing yourself a disservice. And it's not just Alzheimer's. I mean, Alzheimer's is the one that gets, really starts to get your blood curling. It's scary. But, just there's lots of different kinds of dementias too. Some aren't like Alzheimer's where you're going to necessarily die from it. But learning how people are living longer, they're not necessarily living healthier. And, I think we need to learn how to care for people who are cognitively impaired because it's going to happen. People are living, into their 90s, and not everybody's going to have their marbles, when they get there.
Yes.
I mean, lucky when you do, but it's not necessarily the case. So it is important, I think, to learn like you're saying, about death, as morbid as it sounds, at least the process. And then also, it's not, learning about Alzheimer's isn't channeling it in. It's not drawing it to you. And, it goes right back to what we were saying initially. Knowledge is power. And the more you can find out and the more you can learn, the more you can navigate it. And the less scary it will be. It's not going to be any better. It's not going to be a fun ride, but at least it's not, the unknown is often more scary, and
yes.
And it's, again, also, my mother never forgot me. She never forgot me. It's not always going to be, they're not going to remember, they're going to forget everybody, they're going to hallucinate, everybody's going to be different. So knowing what to expect doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen in that way, but it prepares you for, the bumps that are inevitable in anything. Not even just Alzheimer's, just in getting old. I remember everybody was like, wait till you turn 40. Things are going to start hurting. And, you're 35 and you're like, that's crazy. I feel great. It happens. Your body changes as you get older. And the more you know, the less it's scary, or the more you can handle it and have tools to sort of be prepared for it.
That's, Lex, that is so true. That is really true. I know the difference between my mother-in-law's journey and Matt's journey, and having the knowledge was so much better. It was really, and of course, I learned even with Matt as I went along.
Right.
But it really is much better when someone is educated, and I'll keep banging that drum until I can't talk anymore. I'm very passionate about that. Lex, I would love to have you on again, because we didn't even get into the self-care, but I would love for you to come back next year, and I really would like to talk about self-care and what you have to say about that in your book.
I am very passionate about, Well, that's the problem too, right? When we're caregivers, we're caregiving. We're giving it to everybody else, and we just kind of forget about ourselves. Not, I don't think it's intentional. It's just you get so exhausted by giving that you've got nothing left to give to yourself. And I talk about beating the drum. That's sort of my thing, is like you gotta take care of yourself. It's like being on a plane. You got to put your mask on first before you can take care of anybody else. And, I would love to come back and talk about that.
Sure. I would love to have you come back. Okay, where can people purchase your book, Lex?
Okay, so it's called From Zero to Zen, and it is on Amazon. It theoretically is in bookstores, but I've been told it's not there. But you can go to any bookstore and order it, and they can get it for you. I'm a self-published author for this one. Publishers are looking at other books of mine now. So when you're a self-published author, unfortunately, you're not necessarily on bookshelves all over the country. But someday it'll happen. And then you can also go to my website, which is alexandrafree.com, and you can order it on there too. And you can also download the master checklist. If you do nothing else, it's free, but go there. It's literally I think 23, 24 pages. You don't have to download the whole thing. It's a PDF, but it's everything from soup to nuts that you will ever be asked or need as a caregiver, down to what is your loved one's pet's name and who are their veterinarians. Everything is on there. It really is a great place to start. Just download it and start filling it out and get all your ducks in a row.
Yes. Well, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing that, and good luck with your book. I think, folks, this is a book everyone should have from, I'm going to say, high school. Okay? Every adult should have this book, because I'm going to tell you, if you're not already a caregiver, you will be one, or you may need one. And
yeah,
this book, this book will be, the book is out, but this show probably won't be out until January or February. This is a great gift to get anyone at any time. This is a book that should be in every caregiver's library. That's
you.
how passionate I feel about it. You're welcome. And thanks for coming on today, Lex. And
Absolutely,
I appreciate it.
It's been so much fun. As fun as it can be talking about.
Yeah. Yes. You know what? On this show, nothing is taboo. I talk about, death, dying, and the realities of life on this show because, not to be morbid, but it's a part of life. And I really want to thank you for coming on. And folks, if you will be able to read about, say your name right, Alexandra, free, and the blog that Jeanne White, the station manager, writes, and Jeanne produces the show. So thank Jeanne for that. And I want to thank Lillian Cauldwell, who's CEO of Passionate World Talk Radio, makes this all possible. And thank you for listening. And please share this podcast, the show, to help other people. That's what I'm here for. This book is necessary. The download. Folks, I'm a Jersey girl. I'm going to say it. That's a no-brainer. I'd be running to a computer. I would be running to someone's computer if I didn't have one, or to my smartphone and downloading this that Alexandra is offering for free. Do you know how many people ask all the time, what do I do? Where do I go? Well, here you have a book and a checklist for free. And I think when you see the checklist, you're going to want to buy the book. And I wish there was a book like this 23 years ago. I really do.
I could have used this book too.
And I love having people on who unfortunately walk the walk, but they know and they have a passion. And I can't thank you enough, Lex, for coming on. And folks,
thanks, Betsy. It's been my pleasure.
Mine also. If you want to follow me, I am on Facebook, Betsy, Betsye Wurzel, Wurzel, and you will see videos of Matt. You'll even see videos of Matt hallucinating and how I dealt with it. So go check out my Facebook page. And if you're looking for a support group, I have one, #Kick Alzheimer's Ass Movement on Facebook. You don't have to have Alzheimer's. It's for caregivers. It's for support, education, and I welcome everyone to join. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind and shine your light bright, because we sure do need that now more than ever. And that's what I have to say today, folks. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, a subsidiary of Global Media Network LLC. Be safe, everyone, until we chat again. Bye-bye now.